Bryan Kohberger is alleged to be a mass killer, but we have had discussions before where I would maintain if Bryan Kohberger did not get caught, I think he was definitely interested in becoming a serial killer.
Bryan Kohberger, accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students nearly 2 years ago. On the anniversary of these heinous murders, my colleague and co-host, retired police chief David Magnusson, sits down to discuss with Dr. Debbie Goodman what's going on with the trial, where do we go from here, and what can we expect?
Dr. Goodman, the Bryan Kohberger case, what happened?
On November 13th, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students who were residing in a home at King Road, Ethan, Xana, Kaylee, Maddie, were sadly, tragically butchered to death. 6 weeks later, Bryan Kohberger was identified as the prime suspect in this horrendous crime based on 3 key pieces of evidence: a 1-inch knife sheath containing his DNA, at least a dozen phone pings from his cell phone in the vicinity of the house on King Road, and surveillance video of his white Elantra between the hours of 4 and 4:20 a.m. on street surveillance.
Who is Bryan Kohberger?
At the time, Bryan Kohberger was a 28-year-old PhD candidate at Washington State University. And so when asked, who is Bryan Kohberger, I would maintain that this is an individual who really does have the sociopathic tendencies whereby there's little to no remorse. I think he also displays antisocial behavior. We don't even know to this day, did he ever have any type of platonic relationship with a friend? Was he ever involved in any type of intimacy with a young lady? We don't think so. And hence why, mainstream media and many of us in the field would agree that we would call him an incel, an involuntary celibate. I also think Bryan Kohberger was somebody who subscribed to a sense of grandiosity, meaning he would feel that he was the smartest one in the room, the most capable, where he would want the spotlight on him, which is what other PhD candidates said in the scholastic setting. And then ultimately, I would suggest that he's also a hedonistic killer. And by that, I mean, some of these individuals, as the 3 of us know, and certainly your viewers very well versed on these issues, but some mass murderers and serial killers truly derive pleasure from beginning, middle to end. Hence why we would classify them as hedonistic killers. There is pleasure for them, as terrible as it sounds, in the planning stages, which we would consider mens rea, and then ultimately in the finality of the act, the actus rea. And believe it or not, even post-mortem and post-trauma, individuals such as a Bryan Kohberger would be very invested in how law enforcement is proceeding, and it would please one to know that they're steps ahead or above law enforcement's investigation.
Does that bring you back a little bit to a Ted Bundy, perhaps?
There is definitely similarity between how Bryan Kohberger looks and how Ted Bundy looked, and both of whom well-spoken. And yes, I think the manipulation mindset, let's call it, of being the smartest one in the room would also suggest that the individual simply does not think he's getting caught. And although we would classify, or at least I would as a criminologist, differently the 2 killers, because technically Ted Bundy was a serial killer, whereby Bryan Kohberger is alleged to be a mass killer. But we have had discussions before where I would maintain if Bryan Kohberger did not get caught, I think he was definitely interested in becoming a serial killer.
Why do we think he committed these crimes? Any thought process on that? What evidence do you think points to him?
I did create a theory on this particular case, and I call it the JAR theory, JAR, which stands for jealousy, anger, revenge. I truly feel that Bryan Kohberger had a sense of jealousy toward our victims individually and collectively. I think he truly wanted some type of friendship circle. He wanted a girlfriend, and he looked to our victims, I think, as something that was simply unattainable. And I think it leads to the A component, which is anger. I truly feel this angered him, being somebody very much in isolation, feeling apart from rather than a part of. And then ultimately, I believe revenge set in. This is what these killers do, Robert and David, that there's a sense of revenge, that they truly want to take matters into their own hands. They want the power, control, and authority that really they've never had, and now they will have it by becoming killers. And to your question, of course, about the evidence, I would maintain that there are three key pieces of evidence that I think we will see really in the spotlight when this case goes to trial in 2025. And the first of which would be the knife sheath, literally talking about a little 1-inch button closure from the knife holder, if you will, and that was right there at the crime scene. And so when we look at the statistics, we look at the numerics, the numbers for me are absolutely astonishing, because these are numbers we don't even use in mathematics when we're growing up in high school math, college math. We're talking about 1 in 1 octillion. So that's a 1 in 27 zeros is how our forensic experts analyze that the likelihood of this not being Bryan Kohberger, because it was his DNA, is 1 in 1 octillion. So I would look to that as our very primary significant piece of evidence. And then I would say secondary and tertiary would be 12, at least a dozen phone pings coming from Bryan Kohberger's cell phone in the vicinity of the home on King Road. And the tertiary piece, the third element I think is significant, is we have his car, that white Elantra, on surveillance footage between the hours of 4 a.m. and 4:20 a.m. For me, all of that points to him.
What alibi could he come up with then?
We are privy to what they are planning to use as his justification or rationale or foundation for where he was that night, and allegedly he was on a long drive to nowhere. Now, for me, I tend to put some labels on some of this, and as a criminologist, I just feel that's such a Swiss cheese argument. There's just no way to document this, to verify this, no witnesses, nothing time stamped or dated, and I feel that it's a very weak defense to the strength of what the prosecution is coming in with.
What's your thoughts on the point that the court venue, it has been changed?
I don't disagree with this case having a change of venue. I think the initial thinking of any time a case changes the city, the town, the location in which it occurred is to really ensure that there's no taint to the process, that there wouldn't be any violation of policy, procedure, protocol. And perhaps the thinking is that too many people in the town in which it occurred would have a preconceived belief before they would even really officially and legally be given the evidence to evaluate. So I don't disagree with the change of venue, and I think to prevent at all costs any type of mistrial would be very important.
Should the trial be televised?
As a professor, I would like the idea of it being televised, because I think it would create a really interesting and interactive teaching and training opportunity for our students, because it's one thing when we teach from the textbook and we explain how things are done versus we're watching the trial live. So I like it from that vantage point. But as we know, how these decisions are made, interestingly, is it really is up to the sitting judge on the case to determine if he or she would like the cameras in the courtroom. The three of us, of course, remember very well the O.J. Simpson case. and we saw play by play what was going on. Again, the question is, does the public really have a right to know when one is an accused, rather than the right to know once a jury has reached a determination and then everybody?
Is this going to be a death penalty case?
We know that the prosecution is seeking the death penalty. A quadruple murder is certainly aligned in statute with a death penalty case. Interestingly, also what we know in Idaho, which is unusual in comparison to other states and what mainstream methodology is on the sentence of death, the mainstream approach is lethal injection. However, in Idaho, it is the firing squad. So we will see if this future jury decides that that's an appropriate penalty. And certainly if not, the secondary option would be 4 life sentences without parole.
What's the average length on somebody on death row by and large?
On average, it's 20, 25, 30 years. So that's a whole other level and layer, I think, regarding victimology and victimization. You know, we call it primary, secondary, tertiary, even in the victimology sense, that primary, who's the primary victim? Sadly, are 4, beautiful college students. But the secondary victimization, of course, is the loved ones, the parents, the family members, the siblings. And then the tertiary, that third level, is actually the rest of us in society. We don't know these families directly. We just know that their lives and their loved ones have been forever changed and altered due to such a senseless, brutal crime. So you're right, there's going to be different levels of, let's just call it justice instead of closure and healing, because can one ever really heal from a young person's life being taken? What I know about death and dying and grieving and bereavement is that when we look at the categories of who we've lost, for example, if it's the loss of a parent, that's considered our connection to the past. If it's a loss of a spouse, that's considered our connection to the present. But the loss of a child, that's the connection to the future.
What's next? What's coming up in the case next? What can we expect?
Certainly a jury will have to be put together and assembled, and we're hoping that it would be a group of individuals who can leave any preconceived belief about the case, kind of check it at the door, so to speak, and only focus on what will be introduced to them at trial. And it is anticipated, David and Robert, that this is to be a lengthy trial. So the expected start date is in the September range of 2025 to be concluded in December of 2025.
Why do you think it's going to take that long of a trial?
How and why it would be so lengthy? Allegedly, the defense is to be bringing forward a parade of individuals. Now, exactly who these individuals are, we don't know. Nobody's been named, but they have dozens of people that they're going to, have testify in court. My best guess at the moment, I don't have inside information, but my best guess is these might be individuals who have been at the house on King Road, other college students, potentially talking about the ease in which they went through the structure. Maybe the defense is going to try to suggest that this was, let's call it, the party house where a lot of young people went, not only during the weekends, but during the week. And how do we know with certainty that it was Mr. Kohberger? So obviously the strategy is going to be creating some type of doubt. Now, something else that could be significant, of course, and I want to be fair to both sides, we do not have a murder weapon. Do we need the murder weapon? I don't think we need it. We all know of cases where circumstantial evidence has prevailed. We didn't have the murder weapon in the Alex Murdaugh case. We didn't have the murder weapon in the case we also just concluded in the media about the Delphi murder. No murder weapon, but sometimes the digital evidence is very solid and sound, and we do have this DNA on a little 1-inch knife sheath, and I think that's going to be significant.
Well, there you have it. Like Debbie Goodman's, criminal case analysis of the Bryan Kohberger criminal trial.